program title called Stay Ahead of the Curve with Returns. So we're hopefully going to proactively offset some problems or issues you might encounter both now and then heading into 2021 in the future. Quick level setting. My name is Greg Zakowicz. I'm the resident marketing strategist, director of content, and host of the Cart Insiders podcast here at Omnisend. And I will be more facilitating the conversation today than probably being an active contributor to it. And I hope that's okay with you all. Returns, I mean, let's face it, right? Returns can be a beast for retailers. And, you know, we have the increase in online shopping we've seen this year because of obvious reasons. And they are expecting a record number of returns this year. And the question ultimately becomes, you know, what can we do to effectively handle these returns and deliver a top-notch customer return experience? So to help answer this question, all the things that are associated with that one very broad, very generic question, I welcome to the show two experts, a show, webinar, panel, whatever you want to call it, two experts in the returns and fulfillment field, starting with Donny Salazar, CEO and co-founder of MasonHub, and Will Leonard, Director of Customer Success at Returnly. So Don, Will, welcome. Thank you guys both very much for your time today. I'd like to quickly ask you guys if you can do some quick level setting, provide a nice intro for you and your company, and more importantly as well, what type of customers and companies you typically work with, because I think that's important for people to know. So Donny, we'll start with you and then we'll kick it over to Will afterward.
Yeah, sure. So happy to be here. Thank you for the invite. Hi, everyone. My name is Donny Salazar, founder and CEO of MasonHub. We are an order management and fulfillment platform that allows or helps brands scale across multiple channels, like e-commerce, wholesale, dropship, et cetera. We work with primarily brands that started digitally native and are quickly expanding across multiple channels. Some of our brands include Carbon 38, 11 Honore, brands that are exploding across different verticals.
Very good. And Will?
Cool. So my name is Will Leonard. I run the customer success team here at Returnly. Returnly is a smart returns platform for modern retailers. What that means is we provide the software to help shoppers get their return label, create exchanges, and ultimately repurchase as part of the return process. We work with a number of customers, kind of ranging from small to quite large. Some well-known ones, Everlane, Third Love, Avatar Voices, primarily focused on selling into the Shopify Plus market, but also work with some larger retailers like Fanatics that are, you know, on custom integration paths. So that is about me and Returnly.
Very good. So Donny, Will, thanks so much for your time. Again, thanks for being here. And I'm going to get you guys rolling. My goal today is to talk as little as possible and have you guys carry the brunt of it. So hopefully you guys are ready for it. Look forward to the conversation here, and I want to make it as useful as everyone for possible. So the people who are attending live today, if you do have any questions, you guys know the drill by now. You've probably done every meeting remotely for the past 10 months. Please use the chat functionality to ask questions to both Donny or Will, and we'll do our best to try to answer those during the program today. If there's something that maybe is a little more specific or we've run out of time for, we will try to follow up with you offline afterward as well if it makes sense to do so. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump in. All right, I mentioned it before, we expect a lot of returns this year. And frankly, we expect a lot of returns every year now, just based on the nature of online shopping. I see Donny nodding and smiling already, right? So we talk about the holidays, right? NRF data is suggesting this year we could see close to a 75% rise in returns over the previous 5-year average. But online shopping isn't new. Customer returning purchases is not a new phenomenon. So Donny, you have an interesting insight because you're a former retail COO and you have a perspective from the practitioner standpoint, but then with MasonHub, you know, you see a completely different side of things. So you kind of have this holistic view coming there. I'm going to start this with you, Donny. Why in 2020, heading into 2021, where online shopping is a norm, why are returns still such a pain in the e-commerce world?
Well, I think there are several reasons. There's obviously the financial impact of any business. And I think overall, I'll just say this, in all my experience as being a COO, returns is always an afterthought, right? The business is always focused around getting orders out, you know, sales, and there's always this afterthought about returns, even though it's, you know, one of the most one of the, you know, one statistic is 30% of our contacts in any business I've ever worked with are related to returns, right? Because customers are asking about where those are. But it's not given as much of a priority because it's a financial suck to the business. You know, one of the things that are very important that I learned early on in my career is that, you know, there's all this pressure for Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and holiday to get things ready for that. For peak is what we call it in the industry. But there's also the returns peak. And I think this is not given as much of thought. And so people are so focused on November and December, but peak doesn't really end until January, because that's when all of these returns come in. And so overall, you know, you have to plan really, really effectively for this peak that's coming through, because you're, you know, shipping all these orders before the end of the year, but then a lot of those are coming back. The other reason I think returns are still a pain point, or are a pain point in general, is because as opposed to going in and returning something in the store, when you're returning something online, you're sort of just dropping something into the carrier network and hoping it gets processed. So there's a lot of questions or uncertainty as to where your return is and where it's being processed. And then, you know, if you think about it, there's so many things that can go wrong with an e-commerce return, right? First, it's, I need a label, or actually first it's, is this item returnable or not, right? So then you have to solve that problem. Then you have to get them a label, whether it's in the box or whether they go into your website and create a label. Then you have to drop it with a carrier and hope that the carrier brings it back. Then it has to get to your fulfillment center. And then you have to hope that everything that was in that box is on that original RMA that was processed. And then it has to go back to stock. And then finally, the last step is you have to refund your customer for that item. So in that entire chain, there's so many opportunities for things to go wrong. And so in that life cycle of a return, it's a pain point still, because there's so many things to solve for, right? When I talk about every single step of the process, from creating a label to actually processing it in a refund in your shop, in your e-com store, so many things are need to be fixed and need to be resolved in order for that to go well, right? So I think it's still a pain point, because there's so many different steps where things can go wrong. And I think there's still a lot of technology that needs to be applied in order to get a more seamless experience. And I think, you know, Returnly does a good job of this. We have a partnership with them. We're integrated with them. And that's another big pain point, right? A lot of brands aren't integrated with their fulfillment partners. So the whole process of getting an RMA into your fulfillment center's platform is always a pain point. And so I think it'll continue to be you know, when I talk about the pain points and why it's still a pain point, because there's still a lot of opportunity for technology to be adapted or utilized to make this a seamless experience.
So Donny, you said a couple of different things there, and one is a perfect segue over to Will. So I'm going to get to that in just a minute, but I'm going to delay that segue just for a quick question here. From your experience from then, and whenever then was, to now, better or worse, have you seen the return processes and technology and third parties? Have you seen that get better, or with the complexity of online shopping, is it actually getting worse? Can you maybe even anecdotally give us some direction?
Anecdotally, 10 years ago, when we were, you know, which was Ecom 2.0, I guess I would say, there weren't a lot of returns platforms like Returnly or Happy. Those products didn't exist out in the market. Things like, you know, proactive SMS and proactive email notifications were just, you know, early on. So I would say the communication is and transparency is definitely improved, but it's still and I would say that anecdotally, you know, returns contacts have probably gone down. But I think it really depends, you know, in the last part of the process is really your fulfillment partner. So if you have a fulfillment partner that's on their game and within their SLAs processing, you're going to see an improvement there. But you know, with the expansive growth in e-commerce, it's a volume issue. When you know anyone, you know, because you're I would say today it's bad because all the carrier issues that we're all facing, right? With FedEx, I mean, it's bad. It's always usually have been isolated to USPS, but now it's all of them. And so in this period now, I would say that has worsened, but we're also in an unprecedented time. And I think customers, and what I mean, not my personal customers, but end customers receiving their products are generally right now a little bit more understanding because everybody knows what's going on with the carriers.
I would
Yeah.
just,
Oh, go ahead, Will. Go ahead.
I would just add, you know, I think like in a vacuum, the returns universe of technology and providers is much better than it was 5-10 years ago. But the challenge is that shopper expectations have also risen significantly in that time, right? So we used to order online. If you think about Amazon, like free 2-day shipping, we used to be okay getting our packages 5 to 7 days later. And now if it's not Prime, I'm probably not ordering it. And so the same thing has happened to the returns universe of trying to address kind of rising shopper expectations while we build this technology to support that. So I think, you know, two things. A pain point means there's also an opportunity for, you know, smart retailers to take advantage of how to build a better returns process. But that's always going to be, you know, balanced by shopper expectations, which are increasing as the e-commerce becomes kind of, you know, speed and transparency becomes the new normal for e-com.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's something you guys have both touched on so far. So I'm gonna segue and have you keep talking here a little bit, Will. So both from the fulfillment and return processing standpoint, it's kind of the backbone of the customer experience, right? You talked about it a second ago, Will, where all right, if I'm not getting it in 7 days, in the first 7 days, I'm probably not ordering from you. You know, I'm going to the Prime shipping here. But kind of same thing with return. Donny, you touched on it with transparency in returns and being able to, for the customer to see that. You know, Returnly, you guys recently issued a state of returns report. Really good thing. Just the shameless plug it. Go check it out. But you know, two things in there which kind of reinforce things that I think most people kind of already know is, you know, 80% of consumers think about return experience before actually making the purchase. And then 73, so 3/4 won't shop again with a brand if there's a really poor return experience. And I fall into both of those buckets personally as a consumer. So I've had really good return experience. I've had really bad ones, and the bad ones I haven't gone back to shop with a customer. So we think about creating the power of these returns. You know, Donny mentioned a bunch of things before about the experience and kind of what we're going through, and we'll get into some of those things. But if we talk about the general experience, like what would you say, what should retailers really be looking at in order to shape a really good return experience?
Yeah, so the first one I think is actually really easy, and everyone can do this no matter what technology they're using. And this is just having a clear and visible returns policy for your shoppers. So, you know, let shoppers know how long they had to return an item, what they can and can't return, what their expectations should be in terms of an exchange or a refund. And that's something that, you know, obviously everyone has a returns kind of FAQ page, but put that on the product page too. The more explicit and kind of upfront you can be about the returns experience, the more confidence you're giving to those shoppers to buy from you. So that's kind of always our first recommendation is let's look at that page and make sure that's visible and available for shoppers. The kind of next level is around speed and I would say kind of additional transparency. So can you provide the shopper with insight of their return tracking status for their return refund status? So this is similar to now we expect to know where an item is in transit to our house when we order something. I should be able to self-serve that information on their website of where my refund is. Donny mentioned 30% of kind of support questions around returns. A huge chunk of those are, where's my refund? And so if you can find a provider or provide the insight to your shoppers of, hey, your return's in transit to the warehouse, it will arrive in 2 days. It takes us 4 days to process after arrival. That's the sort of information that if you can give shoppers that, they have confidence in your brand and it's going to make them much more likely to rebuy from you in the future.
So, I think someone was going to say that. I was going to say a little bit of a shameless plug, but it's important for the conversation from both of your standpoints here. You talk about the transparency of saying, hey, where's my refund? Like, when am I getting that back to my card? and different retailers, you will have different experiences. Specifically, how do you guys help with that? Like in a practical use case, what do your tools do to help support that transparency and that expedition of those refunds for the customers?
Yeah, so on the Returnly side, we have a return status page that every shopper has access to who creates a return. And so within that page, they can see tracking number status, refund status, what's in transit back. They can see if an item didn't make it, even though it was in the box. And the merchant can also communicate to the shopper, return rejected because item was damaged. And so really using this as like a two-way portal of information so that the shopper does not have to say, hey, merchant X, what's going on? They can just go to the page that's been surfaced to them when they created the return and check on the status as it moves through the tracking network.
And from the MasonHub side, we similarly have a dashboard on, if you can look up any RMA and see the exact status of where everything is. And that's primarily used by customer service agents of our clients. So they can administrate any sort of returns inquiries that we're getting. And we also, in that, similarly to Returnly, give the visibility of every stage of the process. RMA created, RMA has been handed off to the carrier, RMA has been delivered, RMA has been processed, and RMA is complete. The other thing that we've done proactively as well is we're also integrated with the carriers. And so what some of our clients do with our API is they take all the tracking events. And this has actually worked with a few of our clients because they can then proactively send transactional emails. So once a carrier, we through our API, they can pull all the data of the status of an RMA and proactively reach out to their customers so that anticipates any questions that the customer may have. So for instance, when the carrier picks it up, one of our clients will send the notification to the customer saying, hey, USPS or FedEx or whatever carrier has received your item, please allow up to this time. Once it's delivered to the facility, again, they'll send another email saying it has been delivered. It will take, so it's giving proactive communication to these brands because it was a pain point that I saw firsthand, obviously, because aside from running all of operations, I ran all of customer service. And that, as you know, we just talked about 30% of inquiries were related to that and to Will's point specifically around where's my refund.
So you guys have both mentioned multiple times, and Donny, you just did it here, with not only transparency, but communication channels, right? We take that data, the API calls, whatever it might be, and then we let the customer know, right? We provide them. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that. There's email, which you both mentioned. Obviously, I got a bunch of them during the holiday season so far via SMS, right? Different ways. What are you guys finding? It's kind of a two-pronged question here, but what are you guys finding is to be, say, the best, quote unquote, best customer, or maybe the most customer preferred channel that you guys are seeing now? And are you seeing that shift with the increase in just adoption of SMS overall? And Donny, you were just talking there, but we'll start with you if you have anything, and then we'll shift over to Will, because I think you both have different insights here.
So, so we're asking, what's the preferred method of communication?
Yeah, that you're finding from your side.
Well, so we, from my perspective, we don't own the relationship with the shopper. But, personally, I think getting an email is preferred just because for me, I live this business, but even when I drop a return off with the carrier, I'm like, I hope it gets there. And so, I like to be notified through the process. And I think text is also really helpful new method of communication, but I would say email. But also importantly, you also want to drive people to a dashboard or something they can look at to self-serve, because you don't want to bring more inquiries into your customer support center. So it's like, hey, here's what's going on with your return. Feel free, here's a link to your dashboard so you can see the full process and continue to watch it on your own, similar to how people look at their tracking numbers or outbound orders.
I would just say, we're noticing definitely more adoption of SMS. What tends to get the best results is giving the shopper the choice of how they want to receive communications. So I think email is kind of expected, but some shoppers prefer SMS. And I think we're becoming more accustomed to seeing that as at least as an option, if not something that's kind of more prevalent today. I think, and Donny kind of touched on this, but regardless of the channel of communication or the method, I think what's really most important is actually connecting the data across the shop, the kind of merchant's journey or order progress, whatever it is. Because whether you're sending it through dashboard or sending an email, you want to provide the shopper with kind of the most up-to-date information that you have. And whether that lives with a Returnly or a MasonHub or with Shopify, getting that data ported into whatever communication tool you're using is going to make it most valuable for the shopper. So I think kind of integrating the entire tech stack so that you can effectively and proactively communicate with customers is really paramount.
Very good. And just a friendly reminder to the audience today that I'm sure there's questions on returns that you guys want to know as well. So feel free to put those in the chat box so we can start queuing those up. So I think I agree with you guys, right? I expect an email at all stages of communication now. And then I find myself actually liking the SMS messages from both from a tracking standpoint, right? Hey, it's out for delivery. I've got a few of those. It's going to be there today. Returns are great. Hey, it was just processed or order picked up or whatever it might be. So personal standpoint, I'm in agreement with you guys. We've talked a lot about experience and kind of the overarching thing to return so far. The one thing we haven't talked about is actually planning for returns and how to get ready for it. Although time is running short here, but this is something returns aren't going away. So planning for it now, planning for it 3 months from now, you're still planning for it. So when we talk about when it does take planning on the back end, how do you guys advise companies to begin to prepare for just a general increase in returns or to smooth out a return process? And Donny, I'll flip it over to you first.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. First and foremost, make it easy for your customer to generate a label. Whether that be dropping it in a box on the outbound side, which we are able to do for our customers, or on their creating a UI using a technology like Returnly. You will be surprised. And I say, like, even generating a label online can sometimes be hard because customers are like, I don't have printer. So how am I supposed to print this out? Which is a typical pain point that you see. Although some retailers, and even when I was on that side, don't like to drop return labels in boxes because that's encouraging returns, right? So there's a financial impact to that, but then there's the customer experience aspect to that. And so I always strongly advise brands to think about that, because a lot of them are like, just drop it in the box. And I'm like, well, you understand that that's going to create more propensity, which from a business, so you have to balance that, right? Because from a business side, you don't want that because that's cash going out the door. But from a customer experience perspective, you want to make it as easy as possible. So that's one, just making it easy for someone to generate a return label or get a return label. The next thing is just plan, right? So we know, and this is all data that we provide, and that's easily provided from our system. Is like, when the customer places an order, and the average time it's taking to get back if there is a return, and what % your returns are going to be, depending on whatever category you're in, that return fluctuates, return rate fluctuates, but you have this data. So if we know that, 1 million orders are going out this month, and we know that you have a 30% return rate, you can start planning accordingly to see when things will be arriving. The other benefit is that we have the visibility of the tracking number, so we can see what's currently in process to sort of help plan labor accordingly in order to process, because this all becomes a planning for processing time. The other thing, from a business impact, I think that we haven't really talked about is a product that we built, which we call our return rate shop. So I think everyone may be familiar with a rate shop is on the outbound, which is basically selecting the cheapest or fastest method to get to whatever destination you're going. What we've also built, though, because there's a big financial impact to the return shipping, and which is usually free, right? So brands have to eat that cost. What we've done is built a rate shop that can take, because we know the details of what orders shipped out and the weights and the characteristics of that, we can provide the best or cheapest, fastest option for the carriers to choose on the inbound side. So that can save you a significant amount of money, specifically if you're brands that have orders that are ranged from under £1 to over £1, because under £1 generally is most cost effective with the USPS, but over £1 it's the major carriers like FedEx, UPS. And so one thing is to plan financially on that piece and what the impact will be. I think also in general, from a P&L perspective, you need to manage your cash flows and you're planning on like, what's that going to mean for your December or January when you get, there's this delayed process of how to account for returns, which is also a big pain point of the accounting of returns, the financial impact and how to plan accordingly. But you need to plan your financials accordingly for that, because I've seen this before where you have this big peak in December, but you're only dealing with October, November orders. And so you have this false sense that your return rate in December is low. And then all of a sudden you get all these returns in January for orders from December, and you have to restate your financials for the year because that you didn't account for that. That I've seen a lot. So understanding that, I think, and back end, I think the accounting impact is important to talk about. And so I would say those are the things. Make it easy for someone to get a return label, forecast your volumes, and make sure you're accounting accordingly for the returns coming back financially.
And I would just add, setting rules like landing and getting alignment across the organization on what's eligible for returns. If you have special holiday return windows, I think, as Donny points out, you want to be able to plan and forecast your returns volume. And part of that comes with, what is your returns policy? Are you going to charge shoppers to return something? Are you going to give them, an extra 15 days because they're going to buy in December and you want to allow them to return until mid-January, for example? And I think that's a big part of the process of planning for returns peak. The other thing is, you really want to make sure that as you're looking at any increased volume, that you're integrated across your tech stack. I think it's really important to highlight that. You want to make sure if you have a 3PL and a returns platform, that those are talking to each other, that you're pulling in orders from Shopify and pulling live inventory so shoppers can see exactly what they can repurchase when they're going through the returns flow. And even going so far as to integrating with like a support tool like a Zendesk, getting the information that's in Returnly or in MasonHub into the tools your team is using elsewhere is really vital to being kind of prepared to answer an increase in customer inquiries and increase in refunds and returns.
Sorry, I want to add one thing that I remembered that we haven't talked about. I think the other big pain point that we see are exceptions. And we haven't given it a lot of thought here, but I think from a preparation perspective, there are so many different exception items, right? So what do you do when a customer sends back something that is ineligible for a return? Or what if they send something that is not what was intended to come in? Or what do you do if they send you something that's not even your product, right? And these are, you would think that they're minor or not significant, but they're very significant because you need to have a plan for how to handle those. I once visited, I'm not gonna tell you the retailer, but early on in my career, I went to visit a fulfillment center for a major retailer. And there was this whole section in their facility of just pallets of all different types of items. And I'm like, what is that? And they're like, oh, these are items that came back from returns that we don't even know what to do with, right? But, we sort of joke and laugh about it, but there are a lot of things that can go wrong and when things arrive. And so so imagine the customer experience then, right? Like, I got an item that I didn't expect. What do? We can't stop, right? Then it's just going to pile up. So do we process the return? And it's giving the information back to the customer saying, this is what was in the box. You can determine what you want to do. We'll receive it into inventory, and then you can process an order to go back out. But that's another cost to you, right? As a retailer, because now you're sending an order out to a customer, paying shipping now 3 times. And then you're creating a negative experience because then the customer's like, I don't want this back. Send it back to you because I didn't want it, right? So and returns are already somewhat of a negative experience, right? Because the shopper got something that they didn't want. Whether that didn't fit or whatever it was not a necessarily the most positive experience. And so if you're sending stuff back, I always tell clients, like, you're just making a already bad situation worse. And so maybe it's things like just give them a credit, or, it happens, but the exceptions management piece is extremely painful.
So, honest question to both of you guys. Have you ever sent something back that you sent to the wrong company?
I don't know if I've personally done that. When I ran my own e-commerce brand, we would get stuff from when we were making shoes, and we would get like electronics, we would get t-shirts, complete. I mean, we got some Nike shoes once that we considered keeping, but decided to ultimately. But
it happens every day.
It does.
I haven't personally done it, but we get that.
Very good. I'm sure I probably have at some point. Who knows? I'm always sending something back. So you guys have both mentioned, and whether you can speak to it or not is a different question, but I'm going to throw it out there anyways, because you both have some retail experience as practitioners. You both mentioned extended return policies, and something when I was doing client consulting, we would talk about things to do in the holiday season. And one of the recommendations was always for me, well, extend your return policies. And the reason for it is, one, you're giving as a gift. And I'm hypersensitive because my wife's birthday is mid-December. So I'm buying a lot earlier. But if it's, say, clothing, right, it might sit there for 3 weeks, and then it takes her a week or two to wear it and wash it, right? And next thing you know, 30, 45 days have gone by, and I want to return something, and boom, I'm stuck. So this year, people shopping earlier, even more so. Have you guys found extending return windows has helped drive more sales? Or on the flip side, have you seen companies or yourselves experience with extended return policies and actually not seen many returns come in after, say, you go from 30, 45 days, day 31 to 45? There's really no uptick there. I'm curious to see what your thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, so one thing we've noticed and is in the data is that you can extend your returns policy, but it actually doesn't markedly change shopper behavior. So the huge portion of shoppers are still going to return within that 2-week window of ordering it. So extending the policy actually isn't kind of punitive to anyone. It actually just makes the couple shoppers that do want a little extra time or have like an occasion where they need more of a window to return something, it gives them a better experience. So I would say that's kind of what we've noticed, is it doesn't actually change people from waiting until now, the very end of the policy. They still return within the same window for the majority of those shoppers. One thing that you're hitting on is, what is the right returns policy to actually drive sales and create like a growing brand? And so on the Returnly side, what we always try to point to is who's the best in class in your segment or your industry, and what is their returns policy? What do they offer shoppers? Find a comparably priced brand who's maybe making a similar product, apparel, footwear, whatever it may be. And are they offering free returns? Or are they charging for returns, free outbound shipping or free? Those are usually pretty good indicators that that brand has actually driven, a good customer experience and has a good lifetime value for their shoppers, and maybe is something to emulate if you're on the smaller side within that segment.
Yeah, I mean, I would, the only thing I would add to that is I think there's probably tons of data that's been done with the returns and what it drives, but at the end of the day, it's more just about meeting table stakes, right? If you're a retailer that's not offering returns, you're likely going to have challenges with conversion, depending on the category, obviously. But I think it's just something that people expect, and they expect an extended, even if that's not the propensity to purchase or wait doesn't change. I think they just expect it. And so it's less about driving, it's more about just making sure that you're competitive with what other options are out there. And making sure that it's easy for them to do it, because I likely won't buy something if I can't return it, especially if it's online.
Yeah, I think
unless it's deeply discounted, then I can understand. But and that's what some brands do is like, during the periods of like high sale periods, they try to restrict that, but that could ultimately drive lower conversion. And then it's also going to drive more exceptions, right? Because then you're going to get a bunch of contacts saying, well, you said this was blue, but it's actually aqua. And, you pulled a fast one on me. And, I've heard those. You'd be surprised what customers will go to just to be able to return something.
I'm going to start using that one. Thanks. So really great advice on tons of stuff so far today. You guys are being super thorough and thoughtful with your answers. I appreciate it. I hope the audience appreciates it too. I've got a couple more questions for you, and we've got a couple of audience questions as well that I'm going to get to, and I think that should get us right to time here, which is great. This bad question, bad interviewers to have to preface a question, but I'm going to do it anyway. So when you guys talk to prospective customers or new customers who are onboarding or just trying to get up that ramp up period, you think about, you guys are trying to solve a particular issue that they're facing, right? You're in that wheelhouse. When you have those conversations with people, do you find the biggest issues that you are trying to, that they have come to you for, are actually aligned with kind of what their biggest pain point actually needs to be solved, right? So try to think of an example here, but like, is there a disconnect between, hey, I'm coming to you because I need my returns expedited 7 days faster, and then you look at what they're doing, you're like, that's actually not your biggest problem. Your biggest problem is actually this. Do you guys see that infrequently, or is that more commonplace than some people might think? Because I think if you're a business listening to the program today, that it might give you some insight into a better way to look at your own current return process to figure out, we thought it was maybe this, but we should probably be looking at this over here. Do you guys have any advice, or does that resonate with either of you at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we notice a lot is this desire to reduce returns and reduce refunds as much as we can. And Donny just pointed out, we could start a company tomorrow, the three of us, and we would never have a return because we would charge shoppers for return shipping, not offer refunds, and have a one-day return window, right? So anyone can go down that path. And really a lot of what we focus on Returnly on the success side is understanding returns as part of a broader shopper journey, where if we can provide a good experience, it's going to make people buy more in the long term. It's going to make it easier to convert them as new shoppers if they're looking at a generous return policy page. And yes, that may lead to more returns, but what can we do to convert those returns into exchanges, right? Where you're actually not losing cash on the transaction, you're just facilitating a new purchase. And really starting to look at the returns journey as kind of a funnel, the same way we do on the front end of a website of shopper creates a return, we show them relevant products they can repurchase, we recommend products to them. And that may result ultimately as like more raw returns being created, but the long-term or the downstream effect for the brand is a better shopper experience, better lifetime value, and shoppers that are more likely to recommend your brand to other shoppers. So that's a very common kind of education track of discussion that we'll have with customers.
Yeah, I mean, there are many reasons people come over to us, and returns being one of them. And similar to what Will is saying, it's always like about how to reduce returns as opposed to how to optimize for returns. And so when we get to the returns discussion, we're always saying, well, what platform are you using? Do you have a platform? If you don't have a platform, it's going to be very difficult for you to scale. If you have your own technology team to build a returns process, you have to get into those, because otherwise, now we work with larger brands, but we have some smaller brands that we've launched. It's always important for us, what is going to be your not only your policy, but also like the technology and the stack that you're using to make it a seamless experience for your clients.
Very good. I'm glad you both were able to give answers here. Donny, I love what you said there about, hey, we're not about preventing return. Like, we're not focused on preventing returns. We're focused on like optimizing the return experience. And I think it sums it up really nicely. So great kind of quotable takeaway there. Final question before we get to audience questions here. I'm going to ask you to kind of summarize things, and if you think about it like a bullet point format, but what would you guys each say is your top 2 or 3 bullet points you'd recommend to online businesses to help them get ready for what we expect to be a high return season and then beyond as well. So Will, I'll start with you and then we'll close off with Donny there.
Cool. So I would say first review your return policy page, make sure it's accurate. It's stating the practice that you want your shoppers to abide by. I'm going to steal one of Donny's, which is determine how you're going to handle exceptions for the holiday season. I think that's a really good call out. 95% of returns are going to go down one path, which is great. But what do you do for the 5% that are outlier cases and edge cases? And then the third one I would say is just integrations, right? Integrate with the technology that you've purchased so that all your systems are operating on the same data set and can be leveraged to support, returns and Returnly, product at MasonHub Fulfillment Center, your orders in Shopify. You want to be connected across your tech stack as much as possible.
Will stole a couple of mine, but I'll try to.
Come on, Will.
One is be proactive with your customers, right? So that's everything from giving them communication on the life cycle of their return, and also be proactive with your partners, specifically with like a MasonHub, right? To let them know like what's coming up, because you're only as good as the level of communication you're having with your partners. And these relationships are really important. So, anything they need to know. And so not only like I said, not just the end customer or the shopper, but also your internal partners and customers, right? And then I think, the other thing, which I think Will talked about, is just like use the technology that's at hand to try to prevent as much of the where is my refund inquiry as possible.
Very good. Great tips, great takeaways. We've got a couple audience questions here I'm going to get to. Guys, whoever, feel free to jump in. If you have something to say on them, feel free to claim them, and then we'll bounce back and forth, and then we'll do some closing comments, things like that. So again, if you do have any questions and have not already sent those in via the question or chat box, feel free to do so now. First one came in from May. So returns are very bad for the environment, and I own a sustainable company. My company, we do not encourage free returns, unlike many other places. In case people want to make returns, they have to do it on their own. So you're pretty much paying for your own returns at this point. What do you guys think about this? I know you both touched on it a little bit during the presentation today, or during the conversation today, I should say. What do you guys have an opinion on this? Is it like, I would say, hey, it's more important that you provide them with the content before they make the purchase, so they're making the right purchase. But it's also aligns with the brand ethos from a returns perspective, fulfillment perspective in there. What would you guys comment on this?
We offer, a product to support this use case where if, for like a makeup brand, let's say, it's better for the customer just to hold on to the item that they were going to return and donate it. And so you kind of provide this really delightful experience to the shopper at the end of the return, like, oh, good news, you don't have to send it back. You can keep your product. We recommend donating it or using it or something like that. And that's a way to facilitate like a good shopper experience, which maybe you don't want to do with free returns, but you're also not forcing somebody to send something back in the mail that, doesn't align with how you want to run your business. And so I think, Returnly offers that. I'm pretty sure most other returns platforms offer a version of that. But something where you can allow the shopper to ultimately keep their item, even if they've created a return for it, is, a positive experience and aligns with being more sustainable.
The only thing I would add is that, first, it depends on the category. If you're not worried about conversion for people like not wanting to return and having to create their own label, it's a tough experience to who wants to go to the post office and get a label or figure out how to do it online? The other thing operationally that is very hard to do at scale, because then you have all these customers that are sending these returns and you don't have visibility into them. And so that can create a really tough experience, because they'll say, well, I shipped it to you, and you don't have any record of anything, and they could have shipped it to the wrong place. You don't know when it's coming. And so from a full integration and like what we're talking about, like full stack integration of the return lifecycle, that could potentially be problematic from an operational perspective.
Very good. And last question for right now is, if a brand wants to include a return label in a package for a shopper, Is that something Returnly or other RMS can enable?
Yeah, so on the Returnly side, we actually, all labels are created through our self-sort portal. So we don't actually include label in box. Some of our customers do that because they can add a return label as part of the outbound order. But within the platform itself, we found that, return or label in box has some of the same issues Donny was just describing of lack of visibility. So a shopper can drop the item in the mail whenever they want. The retailer may or may not know that has happened. Whereas if you're forcing customers to go through a portal, you now have visibility into the RMA journey, and you can track and kind of view the progress of that return much more easily.
For us, yes, we have the ability to create return labels as they're going in outgoing packages and including them. And to Will's point about the lack of visibility, because we created the label, we have the visibility and the tracking number that we can then communicate out to whatever platform they're on, so that at least it's tied to the RMA. Because what the technology we have is like, if you want a label that's created, our system will automatically generate the label as well as an RMA in our platform, so that we have visibility when that RMA comes back, and we can transfer it fairly easily with that information. So yeah, that is an option. I think again, it's the balance between the customer experience and the financial impact, because by doing that, again, you're encouraging customers to return items.
Great answers. We have maybe one more here. Let me jump in while we have time, so bear with me. Another one coming in. Do you recommend any free return apps that work well with Shopify? And this might fit right into, feel free to call your own out as well. So.
Yeah, so Returnly has a 14-day free trial. I think our plans on the Shopify start at $9.99 a month, so very reasonable cost. But in terms of other free solutions that are free forever, I'm less familiar with that segment.
I can't comment on any free solutions either.
Perfect. May, if you have any questions, feel free to follow up with us afterward as well. It's something more specific. Obviously, this kind of brings me to my next segue almost. Biggest takeaways here based on the conversation alone today: visibility, absolutely critical, and how you communicate that visibility just as much so. Donny, I think you mentioned here, optimize for the returns as opposed to trying to prevent the returns altogether, right? So we're boiling down the experience here. As far as highest level, most important, critical things that we maybe want people to take away, is there anything we neglected to talk about today that you guys, either of you, feel is extremely important here?
I would just, and this is a bit of a shameless plug, but we didn't dive in as much to the kind of exchange part of the returns journey and how to drive shoppers down that path. And that's obviously, expectation that shoppers today can self-serve, a size swap, and how do you kind of incentivize customers to rebuy so that the return is created, but it's not a refund, it's actually an exchange. And I think there's a kind of a bunch of tracks that can go down, but I think that is something that we didn't cover as much. That is definitely part of building a good returns process. So
if we can, let's talk about that for a minute. So we didn't touch on it much. Might have been my bad here, which is fine, right? I'm a human. So let's talk about returns. So if I am trying to make an exchange, right? The company is, or I'm trying to return something. And company obviously wants me to. They want to keep that money, right? They want to keep the dollar. They don't want Donny's accounting nightmare, the proposal that happened before, right? So what are some of those ways where a company can realistically try to get me to make the exchange versus making the return?
Yeah, so when you're selecting a return reason, that's very size or color related. Offer a new product in that same category. So if you're saying, hey, this shirt is too big, show the shopper right there options that are smaller of the same product, because they're probably apt to buy a medium if the large was too big. And if they select that, let's automatically create that order in Shopify, so there's no kind of communication required between the team and the shopper at that point. The other option is you offer a credit at the end of the return where the shopper can go buy instantly anything they want on the site. And that is a way to, maybe it wasn't a size related request, but you still like the brand, and maybe instead of a sweatshirt, you want to get a pair of pants. Let's give the shopper access to funds right away so they can rebuy instantly versus waiting for the 3-week refund period to be completed to get that money back.
So I'm gonna circle back to the conversation we had about inserting return labels into the packaging here. So I did a lot of shopping, like probably most people did recently. There were two companies where I got something where the return labels were included, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna tuck these away because that, to Donnie's point, that makes it really easy for me to return, right? With exchanges, I could envision that inserting return labels into the package actually discourages the exchange and encourages a return more than anything. Just might be a hypothesis. Have either of you seen any, whether it's actual evidence or anecdotal evidence that you could speak to, whether that's true or whether it's not true?
I don't have any, but we actually didn't talk about this, but one thing that's tough with exchanges, and this is actually, I think from the front end side, Returnly has a good solution there. It's just more on the trust with the customer. So I've actually never seen this done. I think this is an opportunity, I would say, because the issue then becomes is, well, when do you send that replacement order? And do you allocate the inventory at the point at which they create the exchange? But what if they never send the order back? How long do you hold that unit that's available? Or do you wait until it's processed? Or do you send it right then and there, right? The replacement order, and you put trust into your customer. So this is a very, very complex operational process to be able to do effectively, which is why I haven't necessarily seen it done as successfully with retailers if they're trying to exchange. And what you'll often find is like, oh, you can process a return, and then once it comes back, we'll, like Will said, here's the credit to buy it, but hopefully that inventory is still available. That's where the pain and the experience becomes negative because it's because of that reason. And so I think it's, I've seen some brands that'll trust that the customer is going to send it back, but what if they send back the wrong item or they send back something different? I mean, it just goes back to the complexity of how to handle an exchange in an e-commerce experience, which I think is an opportunity, but also very complicated. And then the accounting piece, again, going back to that, becomes very complicated.
Anything you can add from that standpoint? Well, because I could see that being a nightmare of a logistical issue to try to figure out.
Yeah, so two things. One, first to the label and box. I think anytime you can have an opportunity to drive a customer to engage with your brand, you have a better outcome potential. So if you just have a label in the box, you're basically telling the customer, you don't have to visit our website again or visit a store again. You can just send this back to us. And so I do think there's a drop in potential conversion, or at least like engagement, if you're going down that track of how you process a return or offer the return. What Donny highlights is a huge challenge for retailers, and that's actually kind of core to Returnly's solution is when shoppers create an exchange or use a credit, Returnly actually is the one who buys that second order on behalf of the customer. And the idea here is that instead of trusting your shopper to send back the right one, Returnly is going to basically take on the liability of the shopper not sending back their item and front that order on their behalf so that the merchant is whole. They have two orders placed. Returnly's paid for one, the shopper's paid for the other. And if for whatever reason the shopper decides to keep both, the merchant is not kind of out that second order. And so this is, a big value add, especially if you think about high volume merchants that are processing thousands of orders and exchanges a day. Being able to insert, that level of trust in the shopper isn't really scalable. And that's why Returnly is able to offer that service. And it's definitely an appealing value add for a merchant.
Have you guys found that trust to be bad trust you put in the shoppers, or do you get a fair amount of, the good majority of them do what they're supposed to do? They ship it back and things are good.
I mean, a lot of this comes down to communication. Returnly has a big data science team that kind of evaluates the shoppers as they go through the return process, which is part of why we're kind of able to offer this credit. But I think what we find ultimately is that shoppers do want to send their items back. It's about communication. A lot of times what we see is, okay, the shopper didn't send it back. It's because they forgot to, not because they were trying to necessarily rip off the brand. And so a lot of it just comes down to how do you set up your emails and your communications to the shopper to encourage them to send the item back, even if they happen to get the right item in the mail 2 days after they created the return, right?
Wonderful. I think it's a good place to leave it today, unless you guys think there's something else we need to touch on as far as returns. But thanks for bringing that up, Will. I think it's tons of really good information there, and the other aspect of it. as well. So Donny, Will, thank you guys so much. I know we have Google, we have things in writing right now, but Donny, if someone wants to reach out to you and or MasonHub, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you guys, whether it's web URL, email address, whatever you.
Go to masonhub.co and you can submit a ticket or an inquiry directly from our site.
Cool. And how about for you, Will?
Same, you can make a request directly on the website, returnly.com. Questions, you can also email me directly, will@returnly.com. Happy to answer any questions, direct you to the right person on our team to help out.
Excellent. So Donny Salazar, CEO and co-founder of MasonHub, Will Leonard, Director of Customer Success, Returnly. Thank you, gentlemen, both for your time today. Enjoy the conversation. Thank you for having me talk very little, which I certainly appreciate as well. And if anyone has any questions, follow up afterward, please feel free to reach out to us, reach out to them directly. And until then, have a happy holidays and a happy new year to everyone. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one. Bye.